Hello, and this is going to be my video discussing why I disagree with the idea of dueling for spot. So, first, please keep in mind that regardless of whether or not you agree with me, this is something that's ultimately a matter of opinion. There's no right and wrong, it's not a black and white thing. But when you have a game like video that people play in such different ways and for such different reasons, and of course, there are going to be some strong disagreements, especially concerning something like how exactly people should compete for sought after and sometimes scarce resources. But yep. So I think that I tend to discuss this a lot with people. I think that I will go over a lot of the things I usually hear and a lot of the points people will often make. Both the rational and the irrational ones, and discuss it kind of around those in a way that hopefully makes my thoughts and ideas clear. So, well, just kind of to get this one out of the way with, by far the most irrational and, interestingly enough, the most common one I hear is when people say that it is the most fair way, or in any way of saying a fair way, of determining who gets a spot. I think that most of the reasons it's not fair are pretty self-evident, to be honest. Not even just the huge disparity in gear level or 1v1 performance that exists between players and between classes, but the often overlooked fact that the aggressor is not absorbing any risk. The aggressor did not have a spot before, and if they lose the duel, they still don't have a spot. Whereas the aggressee stands to lose their spot over this. So, I mean, honestly, I don't think that people who say it's fair unironically believe it's fair. I think that a lot of times it's that people who are proponents of duel for spot are the ones who stand to benefit the most from it, usually the very geared players. And no one really wants to admit when they're playing a game that's obviously stacked against their opponent, because it doesn't really feel good to win games like that, and it doesn't look good to play games like that. So yeah, I think that sometimes it's just a bit of mental gymnastics that end up employed by people who are proponents of it, but would have trouble admitting that it's anything but fair. So I won't spend too much time on the whole fair versus not fair thing. I think it's just the noisier ones I argue with tend to. The noisier ones tend to argue, and they tend to default to saying something like that is so obviously false. But sometimes, interestingly enough, when I push people who start off saying something like that, a lot of times I'll get something like, oh, I just think it's that the stronger player has more of a right to grind there. And while I still do not agree with that, that's a much better argument that really underscores the stark differences in how people believe the game should be played and how these disputes should be decided. Some people are of the opinion that, oh, this is a competitive game, therefore some level of competition for resources makes sense. And the other side likes to treat a spot kind of like a park bench. It's like while they acknowledge that no one owns it, if someone's there and you're stronger than them and you want it, you're not going to physically shove them off of it. And again, different people who play the game different ways. Now, sometimes when I argue with someone who says stuff like that oh, the stronger player has more of a right to be there, I will bring up something like, well, would it not make sense for me to say that whoever can grind this bot more efficiently should be there, as it's in essence saying that whoever utilizes this resource better has more of a claim to it. And depending on how they answer that usually will dictate whether or not we have a discussion or an argument. Because while I still don't believe that, I don't think that it would make any more or less sense for me to support a system like that. I think that a lot of times people who gravitate more toward PvP content are also more likely to be in favor of contesting others for spots. I could be wrong about that, but just from a lot of what I see, that seems to be the case, so maybe that's why. A lot of times, actually pretty much all the time, it comes down to who is victorious with a certain type of PvP. That's who should get the spot, but yeah, anyways. So while I still don't agree with that whole, oh, it's the stronger player, in this case, whoever wins a 1v1 should get it, that's something that is absolutely valid and simply means that someone has a different way of going about this than me. And again, while I don't agree, that is not something that I see as inherently irrational. Now, I think that the most logical person I had a discussion with about this who was in favor of Duel for Spot, because he was in this boat, he brought up the idea that because not everyone's, like, time is not an equalized resource. Not everyone has the same amount of time to play every day. Therefore, someone who can't play for very long is more likely to push for a system that would let them actively contest another person's spot. Now, again, while I don't agree, that is something that really, again, highlights how this is ultimately a difference in opinion, and how different people, based on their own personal needs and what will and won't benefit them, are likely to advocate for different systems. And I think it also does a good job of kind of reinforcing the fact that no matter what, nothing will be fair or equitable for everyone. There will always be someone who gets the short end of the stick, or maybe doesn't even get a stick, depending. But yeah, whether you do what I do and just ask someone how long they'll be there and wait, or go to a new channel, or you war someone's skill, or you ask them to duel, or whatever, it's never going to be something that is truly fair for all parties involved. Yep. Now, one other kind of fun thing I like to do when I get one of the like really militantly aggressive people who's like, oh, you're just a stupid PvE Care Bear, this is a PvP game, man up and duel for spot, whatever. I'd like to say things like, oh, well, if this is such a hardcore PvP game, why is it that the official system put in place by the development team punishes the aggressor so harshly to the point of them downgrading their gear in open world PvP? Now, the real reason I believe the karma system is designed the way it is I think it's a business move on their part. They would have a hard time attracting new players if high-geared PvP players were essentially allowed to, with little to no penalty, run around killing anyone they wanted. I don't think the developers are actually trying to discourage open world PvP in any way at all. I think it's just a consequence of something they had to put in place to make the game more player friendly. But yeah, anyways, I get some interesting responses. Because usually when I meet someone with a not with a strong opinion, but with a strong opinion that they will argue in a particularly aggressive way, I'd like to try to put an alternative to that opinion in a way that sometimes leads to a very robust discussion, I guess, to put it nicely. But yeah, or bringing up the obvious fact that while this game does have PvP elements, it's not necessarily an accurate characterization to say that it is simply a PvP game. It's also a game with many RNG elements. It's also a life skill game. It would be just as valid for me to say that whoever has the higher total life skill level should get a spot, which I would probably lose every time. But yeah, it's interesting to see how one system that doesn't necessarily make any more sense than another is taken off the way it has. Now, a few more interesting general notes about it. One thing that one thing that a lot of people, I don't know again if they actually believe this or if this is just kind of their excuse, but a lot of times I will get people who basically present a false dichotomy to me saying, oh, well, the only two options are you either grind over top of each other and grief each other, or you duel for spot. One person even made the assertion that duel for spot was necessary, and that was his basis for it. I mean, no. And then when I brought up what I thought was a pretty obvious point, that you could just ask someone how long they will be there and either channel swap or wait. And then this was on Twitch, some more people brought up some other borderline common sense alternatives. And then he said something about how no sane person would do any of those things. Yeah, it was kind of interesting. But yeah, I think that, how to say, honestly, some of the nastiest, most entitled people I've met are the strong proponents of a duel for spot system who believe that it's something you have to follow, who believe that it's this hard community rule. When probably 1 out of every 5 people I meet asks me, and 1 out of every 3 of the ones who ask me get belligerent when I say no. I really don't know why it is that so many people think that it's almost to the point of being a rule. And actually, on that note, a lot of players I talk to, especially newer ones, will say that they accept it because they were told by usually such and such Siege player that it's a community rule, that it's how things have always been done, which, by the way, could not be more false. Things have not always been done that way. Things are not always done this way now. It's not a community rule. And you are not suddenly a griefer if you say no. And I also meet a lot of people who say that they don't like it, but they say yes just because they know that the person is going to just try to feed them to PvE or get nasty with them if they say no. And again, on that note, I urge people. I know that not everyone has the means to deal with this, but I urge people, if you do not agree with the duel for spot construct, I will call it, to say no if someone asks you. A lot of times you'll get a respectful player, but here's the thing. If you get a belligerent player, the spot is going to go to the more patient one, which 99.9% of the time is not them. And it's not just the utility of you keeping your spot, because a lot of times it will end up taking longer for you to do what you need to do for that than it would to find a new spot. The point is not validating the entitled behavior of some of these people. Because the reason that a lot of these things are unfortunately perpetuated the way they are is because, well, the people who have the overall disposition of a petulant child end up getting their way more often than not. Like, I have had people throw some of the biggest fits on me when I say no to duel for spot. I don't as commonly get called a griefer now as I used to when I say no, but I have heard some really crazy things from people when I say no to them. It's usually pretty clear right away if someone is going to be one of the nasty ones or not. And it usually seems to be there isn't much of a middle ground. When I say no, either they'll say okay and they'll leave, or they will just get overtly nasty. I remember one really interesting case. There's a Siege player, go figure. And when I said no, he went off on some spiel about me not respecting his time. And then he said that if I don't respect his, he's not going to respect mine. And then he started grinding over top of me, which I honestly don't mind. Because it's like, I don't have a problem if someone wants to try to contest me for my spot. What I have a problem with is them thinking that I am in the wrong if I don't basically agree to their little game that they want to play and let them have a chance at my spot under a set of rules that they determine. It's like, no, they can use whatever they want to within the confines of what e-game allows to try to get my spot for me. That's fine. I just don't like this idea that they think I have to say yes to their request, which a lot of times will end up being a demand for Duel, just because that's the rule that's enforced by some very small circle of players that have a disproportionately large voice in the community. But yeah. So again, it is a matter of opinion. There is no right and wrong. I do feel strongly about my side. Other people feel very strongly about their sides. But if you are, how to say, don't base your opinion off of how many people seem to think one thing or another. Don't base it off of who supports it and who doesn't support it. Base it off of, well, basically what I'm saying is form your own thoughts about this. Don't go with something just because someone made the absurd and false claim that it's a community rule. Don't base it off of how many players and how many big guilds say it's the case. Base it off of how you personally want to play the game and what makes sense to you. If you are going to be a proponent of the idea of dueling for spot, please understand that it's not something that everyone has to follow. And if you are going to be against the idea of dueling for spot, people will still ask you. If you're going to be against it, I urge you to say no to it. Don't like bend the knee to them just because whatever. But I urge you to say no to it and to, as best you can, stand by that decision, and also not to ask. It can't be this. I guess it would be a double standard kind of. Don't ask people to do it but then refuse. It's one way or the other. Accept the inconveniences that come with trying to show what I consider to be that little extra bit of respect. Yeah, that's basically it. Understand that everyone has their own way of playing the game and their own unique opinions concerning how things should be done. And I mean, go ahead and explain your point and explain how you think about it, but don't act like someone else just because they have different ways they like to do things or different reasons for them that you are in the right and they are in the wrong. Again, matters of opinion. I think that's all I have to say. Goodbye.